Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome back. And, well, coming up in just a second, we're going to have Dr. Lawrence Gelman back with us. He's the author of this big book. And, boy, this is almost a lifetime work, but very passionately done, and it's called The Fall from Grace. And we'll tell you where you can get a copy of this coming up in just a few moments, and we're delighted to have him back. Dr. Gelman, welcome back. I understand you're just right out of surgery or something, right?
Yeah, just finished here. Yep.
Pretty busy morning. Thanks for your time. I value it greatly, and I know you're a busy man. By the way, where can people get a copy of your book?
Yeah.
What's that?
Just email me at lrgelman@aol.com.
Okay.
lrgelman, Gelman.
Okay, at AOL.com. Hey, listen,
right.
I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the Supreme Court, and you write about this in your book, and we talked briefly about it last time, and the separation of powers. And I think your passion, when I'm hearing you say, is that we're far from what our founding fathers wanted us to be with separation of powers, and that you find the Supreme Court involved in cases that it has no business being involved in. Take us back to what should be the proper order of the Supreme Court.
The Constitution is very clear on the separation of powers and the powers and authorities of each branch of government. The first thing we need to realize is that the federal government is not the ultimate authority in the United States. The ultimate authority is the people. And also, states have power, which the federal government does not. What we have here is we have the system has been restructured in an unconstitutional manner, where the people serve the states and the states serve the federal. It's not the way it's supposed to be. The Constitution is structured that we have a confederation of states that have joined voluntarily and have given some authority to a federal government on issues between states, not within states, but between states. And the Constitution is very clear about that. In fact, there was a Supreme Court decision, Georgia versus Chisholm, back in like 1796, in which the Supreme Court got involved in a case when a citizen of one state sued the government of another state, and the Supreme Court became involved with that. In their view, they had the power to do that. That so incensed the states that the 11th Amendment was passed, one of the only two amendments that was passed during the lifetime of our founding fathers, that prohibited the federal government or the state or the Supreme Court to be involved in intrastate concerns. So therefore, the Supreme Court only has authority between states, not within states, and between the Confederation of States, called United States, and foreign powers. That's the only authority the Supreme Court has. All of these decisions that come up with involving themselves in the laws of a state or intrastate events is completely unconstitutional.
All right, so where did it slip through? Where did they started doing this and we didn't call them on it?
Well, it started slipping through as our founding fathers passed away. And so way back in 1803, after George Washington had died, and after most of many of the other founding fathers had died, the Supreme Court, which was in the Chief Justice Marshall, who was appointed by John Adams, a Federalist, and Chief Justice Marshall was a Federalist. And what the Federalists believed in a strong central government. Alexander Hamilton on one side, strong central government. Thomas Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration of Independence, on the other side, that wanted a weak central government, and where the people were in control. So the Federalists had lost the election to Thomas Jefferson, who was a Democrat Republican. And so what Adams did was he put Marshall, who was his Secretary of State, put him in as a Supreme Court justice who's a Federalist. And then what Marshall did from that time and for the next 25 years is that every decision he was involved with kept putting more power in the hands of the central government and less power in the hands of the states and of the people. So the first big decision was in 1803, the Marbury versus Madison decision. And I really don't want to have the time to go into details of the case itself. But in that decision is when the Supreme Court took it upon itself to have the authority of interpretation of the Constitution. And from that point on, the Supreme Court has always been accepted inappropriately as the ultimate arbiter of interpretation of the Constitution. Nothing in the Constitution gives the Supreme Court any such authority. In fact, no branch of the Supreme Court has any of the federal government has any authority to interpret the Constitution. The only people that are allowed to interpret the Constitution are the citizens, not the federal government.
All right, so the precedence has been set. Let me fast forward a little bit. Is it possible to bring the Supreme Court back into its proper perspective?
No, it's not possible because you have to understand the ultimate goal of the federal government is increasing its power, which is the goal of every government, of every dictatorship, of every tyranny. It is the reason the Constitution was created was to prevent the federal government from overexerting its authority. That if you could count on the honesty of the politicians, you don't need a constitution. The Constitution is written specifically to limit the power of the federal government. That is what it's written. It's not written to give authority to the federal government. It's written to limit the authority of the federal government. Therefore, now that the federal government has taken over control of the interpretation of the Constitution, there's no way to get it back. Because no branch of the federal government is going to constrain the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court gives more power to the federal government. This is what the federal government wants. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. The only way to rein in the federal government is through the states. But that has been eliminated because our senators are now elected popularly instead of the way it was written in the Constitution, which when people talk about the Electoral College, they haven't the slightest idea, our idiot pundits and news media hasn't the slightest idea what the Constitution was about. The Constitution was written to constrain the federal government, and one of the mechanisms was to give power to the state legislatures. And the power they had was, one, they picked the delegates to the Electoral College, so it was the state legislature which determined who was going to be president, and it was a state legislature that was supposed to appoint the senators. That was to give power to the states and prevent the federal government from concentrating power. But now the party system is in control, not the states, the party system, and so that the Democrats and Republican parties run the show right now. A senator from a state used to be a representative of a state. Now a senator is representative of a party. And we know that very readily because when they talk to a senator, it has nothing to do, a federal senator, it has nothing to do from the state that the senator is from. You know, they don't care where the senator is from, what state. They only care what party, right? All they care about is what party. And if you listen to these senators, all they discuss is not what's good for the state, but what's good for the party. And so there's no way of getting it presently to get the control back to the people. The only thing that can be done is for the people to rise up. There's no other way because the senators and representatives, the federal ones, no longer represent the state or the people. They are emissaries of the central government, and they represent their political party. Aristocracy. Okay, we have a king, the president who's a king, and we have the Senate and the House of Representatives, which is nothing but the court of the king, the aristocracy. And we have the Supreme Court, which is nothing more than the clerical branch. Okay, we no longer have a constitutional democratic republic. What we have is an aristocratic tyranny, which with periodic elections. But the elections are completely meaningless because the people that are chosen by the aristocracy, by the party. The party chooses the representative, and all we get to do is choose the one aristocratic family or another. That's all we get to choose, the aristocracy of the Republicans, the aristocracy of the Democrats. All we have is an option to choose one aristocratic family or the other. That is why elections are meaningless.
Interesting, very interesting. I'm going to take a break, Dr. Gelman. When I come back, I want to deal with the subject of the struggle between the Supreme Court of the state and the federal Supreme Court. We're seeing states pass laws that's being challenged by the Supreme Court that somehow overturns the will of the people. And I'm sure you have a comment on that. We'll be right back with Dr. Lawrence Gelman. He's the author of Fall from Grace. And you can get one of these books by just emailing him at lrgelman, Gelman, at AOL.com. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and honored to have back with us today Dr. Lawrence Gelman. He's the author of this incredible book, and it's a very big book, and I'm telling you, he has done his homework on this. It's called The Fall from Grace, and you can email him at lrgelman, Gelman, at AOL.com, and make arrangements to get a copy of this book. We're talking about well, the structure of the United States and the separation of powers. And Dr. Gelman, as we were going to the break, I asked a question. There seems to be a lot of struggle now that the people in a state will pass a law, and then it gets challenged by the courts, and then they'll subordinate the state Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court and say it's unconstitutional. Based on what? I'm trying to figure out, how is this struggle going to get resolved, or if can it get resolved?
Under the present structure, it cannot get resolved. The Supreme Court and the federal government, by the way, has essentially no authority within a state of any kind whatsoever. But if you have the power to do something, you do it. That's how tyrannies function. All the tyrannies of the world, whether it's a dictator or a king or whatever, they do things in a structure which is considered legal. But legality and being legitimate is not the same thing. So we have a structure which allows our government to behave legally but not legitimately. And so there's no way of resolving the problem under the present structure, because the party system is now at the top of our political pyramid. And so that therefore, you ask, what can a state do, or what can a state Supreme Court do, or the people do when it comes to federal government? Well, what they can do today is ignore the federal government. In other words, if the federal government has an opinion, if the federal government has a law, or the federal government has an opinion, and the state doesn't agree to it, it doesn't have to obey it. The state government could say, we don't recognize your authority. The state Supreme Court could say, we don't recognize the authority of the federal Supreme Court, and they'd be well within their constitutional rights. Why don't they do that? The reason they don't do that is because the governor of a state is a Democrat or Republican, and the Supreme Court is chosen by the party members of, just like the federal Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court is exactly the same thing. They're chosen by one party or the other. And so therefore their loyalty is to the party, and the party is national. So therefore the Republican Party or the Democrat Party of Texas is loyal to the national Democrat and Republican Party, not to the people of Texas, and certainly not to the Constitution. And so therefore the people that we look to uphold the Constitution belong to the enemy. And so it's all a game that they play in order to develop a constituency. The Republicans, they take a position opposite of Democrats, not because they're principled, but because they want to create a divider between the two parties in order to arbitrarily create a constituency. So the Democrats do one thing and Republicans do the other thing, not because either side has any principles, but because they want to create a constituency. And a constituency is based simply upon politics and power, nothing to do with the Constitution, nothing to do with the powers of a state. So we as citizens look to our representative, and we hope that the representative is on our party. Unfortunately, the representative represents the party and not the people. And that is why the governor of Texas or the governor of Florida or whoever, or the governor of California will never stand up to the federal government, never, because they belong to the party. Now, you might say, well, if the federal government is controlled by the Democrats and the state is controlled by the Republicans, why don't the Republican in the state say we're not listening to the federal government because because we don't believe it? But the reason they don't is because today it's Democrat, tomorrow it's Republican. And the Republicans, when they're in power, they want everyone to obey the Republican president. And so there's this agreement between these mafioso gangs, Democrats and Republicans, that the Republican Party, when the Democrats are in charge, will go along with the Democrat Party as far as their authority, because the Republicans expect the Democrats to go along with the Republican Party when the Republican Party is in power. That's all it is. It's just a contract among thieves in order to control power. So that each side knows that their power will be obeyed or listened to by the other party, because they both know that one day it's Democrats are in charge, the next day Republicans are in charge. Unfortunately, the people are never in charge anymore.
You know, we're sensing more and more of what you're talking about. We're seeing the breakdown. We're saying we're trying to throw the Constitution around. It's unconstitutional. This isn't what our founding fathers had in mind. And one of the things that has really come to the forefront is the abuse of powers of the current president. He's taken that position, and it's tyrannical, dictatorial, but there's no pushback. There's just no pushback. In fact, what was supposed to be checks and balances, we can't check anything. We can't balance anything. We don't seem to have a way to stop it.
Right, because the Constitution is being ignored. And as I explained, the reason that there's no checks and balances, now, obviously the president, not just this president, he's a little more egregious than some of the others, but all the others are the same thing as well. The president is acting well outside his authority. The Constitution does not provide for executive order. It provides for executive power. And the executive power is the execution of laws passed by the legislature. Other than that, the president has no authority. But this creation of the executive order, which doesn't exist in the Constitution, now allows the president, with the connivance of the Supreme Court and the Senate and the House of Representatives, allows the president to do things for which he has no authority whatsoever. Now, the House of Representatives and the Senate could easily and have the authority constitutionally to prevent the government, the executive branch, the president, from doing anything. He can't do anything without the approval of the Senate and the House. And the House is in charge of the Republicans. Why don't they do something? Because they have no principles. Okay, that's the bottom. And so the Republicans don't do anything because what they're hoping for is that the next election, or the one after this, the next presidential election will have a Republican in there. And what they expect is that the Democrats go along with the Republican president with the way the Republicans are going. But that's only politics. The fact of the matter is that the House of Representatives could prevent the president from doing anything whatsoever simply by cutting off funding. But they won't do it, because they all belong to the same club.
All right, so if the president, threatening to do so now, does some kind of massive executive order on this whole issue of immigration, let's say he does it, could Congress reconvene and overturn it?
Absolutely. You see, for the president to implement, for anything to be implemented requires money. Money can only come from legislation originating in the House of Representatives. And who's in charge of that? The Republicans. So the president can't do anything because the House of Representatives could simply not fund. In other words, the president could say, go bomb Syria. Or the House of Representatives could say, we're not going to fund it. So talk all you want. But that's not what the House does it? It just complains about it make a political issue out of it, but allows the president to do what he wants to do. So then they want to blame the president if it goes awry. Okay, so it's all politics. It has nothing to do with principled functioning or constitutional functioning of the government. So the power and the authority to rein in the executive branch is well within. In fact, not only is it within the authority of the House of Representatives and the Senate, it is their constitutional obligation to do it, to uphold the Constitution, and they're not doing it. So they're all acting unconstitutional outside of authority, and the House of Representatives and the Senate by not upholding the Constitution. So they're all acting unconstitutionally, but they do it purposefully because they believe in a strong central government, and they believe that the central government should manage the lives of all the people, like any other aristocracy or dictatorship.
The Obamacare mess, I'm sure you could unload on that, but the bottom line is, could we recall this? Could we just stop funding it? I mean, even though it's a law, what could we do to stop this stupid thing?
The Constitution says that all bills generating revenue must come out of the House of Representatives. That's where it has to initiate. So without a bill for revenue coming out of the House of Representatives, nothing can be funded. Secondly, the Constitution specifically says any withdrawal of funds from the Treasury requires law. In other words, every withdrawal of funds from the Treasury, which is what the Affordable Care Act is and many other things are, everything else is, requires a law to do that. So if the House of Representatives does not pass a law allowing funding of whatever, then funding cannot occur. And the House of Representatives has the complete authority to prevent the president from doing anything. Also has the authority to prevent the Senate from doing anything. So either branch of the House could prevent anything from happening simply by not funding it. Neither house does it. One's in charge by the Republicans, the other one by the Democrat, which is a very good example of the collusion between the parties and then the collusion with the goal of creating a very strong central government that dominates the people and controls the lives of the American citizens. So the authority is there because we have an unconstitutional government in which a party system is what is in charge, not the ideology of the founding fathers, but the party system in which both parties agree that the important thing is that the central government be strong and that the party system be controlling the country. That's what they agree on that. It's like mafiosos coming together when they have a common enemy. And in this case, the common enemy is the Constitution and the people.
All right, I only got about a minute and a half left here, but again, back to Obamacare. It's law. So are they required to fund it, or can they?
No.
Okay.
No, they are not required. Absolutely not. They are not required to fund it. The House of doesn't matter. The House of Representatives could defund the executive branch. The House of Representatives could say, we're not paying the president or anybody. They could do that. They could defund anything that they want to. And the word budget does not appear in the Constitution. There's no such thing as a budgetary process. Every funding is supposed to be individualized. This idea that we have to fund everything or fund nothing is completely made up, whole cloth, by the government. That doesn't exist. The only reason that we go along with that is so that everybody can get what they want. In other words, if I want my program passed, then I have to go along with the other guy's program, whether I agree with it or not. The only important thing is that the central government gets to be bigger and stronger. And so therefore, they have the authority to do it, but they won't do it because I just can't re-emphasize enough, they all belong to the same club. They all belong to the aristocratic club. The people are serfs on the outside. The Democrats and Republicans are the aristocracy, which are behaving unconstitutionally, and there's no hope in the way the system. There's no hope looking at the Republicans or the Democrats. There's no hope in that. There's no possibility.
I got to scoot. Thank you, Dr. Gelman. Thank you for your passion. And again, it's called The Fall from Grace. You can email him at lrgelman, Gelman, at AOL.com and correspond with him to get a copy of everything that he talked about. He put it in this book entitled A Fall from Grace. Thank you, my friend. I know you were on a tight schedule today. We value your time. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me out.